Welcome. My name is Cathy Bartch. I'm the Associate Director of Latin American and LatinX Studies at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm thrilled to be here today with filmmaker as well as screenwriter and photographer Martín Weber to discuss his award-winning and really powerful and wonderful film Mapa de Sueños Latinoamericanos. I just watched it a few days ago, and I'm still thinking about this film, and I'm really excited to have a discussion today about the film and as well as your life as a filmmaker and also the challenges that you encountered in making the film.
I I'm an artist. I have worked with different media, and I this is a project that started well even long before the beginning of the first photograph in which the film is based. It's very it's like a 30-year project that took most of my life to make, and and basically it's a film that goes back in this to these photographs that I made throughout 8 countries in Latin America, in which I started to go with a small blackboard and ask people to write down a wish or a dream, and that with that in mind, it started very little by one country, and then I started going to another one and another one. And by the end, when I finished doing that project, I realized that it had been 20 years since the beginning to the end of that part of the project. So I asked myself, what happened to the people I had photographed, and what happened to those countries? And that's what made me decide to go back and reconnect with the ones that I could.
And what I mean, what gave you the I mean, why what like how did you come up with that idea to ask people go to a blackboard and write down some of your dreams? What was the impetus for that initial idea?
That's why I said it starts long before. I mean, the initial idea comes from discussions that I had during a high school, in which I went to a very highly politicized high school, in which we were discussing the Nicaraguan revolution, which was going on more or less at that time. And I realized by in that discussion that in my mind I had um, imagery that was mostly produced by North Americans and Europeans, but also the idea of that I had, I was just repeating information that had come to me, and there was a spark there that I realized that I just wanted to go to those countries, and actually kind of bring back first-hand testimonies by the people that were living those stories. And that was, again, I was like maybe 16 year old. And many years later, I took on one hand, an art practice, especially photography. And on the other hand, I was studying art history, specialized in theater and film. I was reading a lot of Bertolt Brecht, and uh, people that had worked with theater and staging in a way that, in his case, he was interested on people not only identifying with the characters that were on stage, but also he wanted to create this distance, enough distance for them to understand the context in which those characters were living their stories. And that was another spark that came to me as something that I realized it was something that I wanted to work with. And seeing photography, especially in the newspapers, in which you have a person or a group being portrayed or being represented, you will often find a caption that will be added not by the people involved, but later on, by people working in the newspaper. And I asked myself, why not that caption will be written by the same people that are being photographed? So there was all this change of thoughts and questioning the very basic of documentary practice. I was interested on having this turn into a collaboration rather than photographing somebody else and bringing that image alone to a distant place. I wanted to create another dynamic. I wanted to work in this, kind of a horizontal way in which always, there's the photographer that has this craft, but to put it in service of the people that are being represented. Just bear in mind that when I started this was the early 90s, and even at least in Argentina, we were just, very recently coming out of dictatorship. So to exercise your voice, to exercise freedom of speech, but also the notion of empowerment were things that were not very much talked about, or were just beginning to be an issue that we were facing and actually trying to, get grasp of.
Great. That's amazing. And is this before I mean the film, and we talked briefly about this, you said took altogether about 10 years. And so I guess the
Yeah.
next question I have is like what were some of the major challenges that you faced in making this film? You mean because you visit so many countries, and I'll ask more specifically about some of the characters that I saw or the scenarios that I saw. But if I recall, you went to Cuba, Peru, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Argentina, Brazil, so many different countries, and even
Colombia.
what?
Colombia, which is,
Colombia. That's right as well. And so, what
no,
were some of the challenges?
there were all kinds of, I mean, from raising the funds to, to go back to. It started very little by, me inviting my brother-in-law that we were in LA, and I said, let's go to, cross the border and go to Tijuana, and let's see what happened with, some of the stories that I had photographed there. So it started, very much of, let's do it. Then, as always, as had happened to me before, the idea of, okay, then you sit down and realize, if I really want to do this, I need to find funding. So grants had been always, institutions have been always helpful in terms of financing, little by little. That's why also it took time to raise the resources. The other thing was to find the people, to reconnect. You have to understand that when I started, it was the time of the fax. The email was barely beginning, so many of the people that I had met during the first stage, which were these photographs, I had some, like phone numbers and, some ways of tracing them back, but some not, because they were very small towns. Others, like I moved so much in that period of time that I even lost some books where I had written all this information. So was again to reconnect with people that had helped me in the first place, which in that sense, something that it's very crucial to the project is that I had worked with contacting local journalists, human rights organizers, different kind of institution, even just asking friends, like, do you know somebody who knows somebody who that lives in that country? So in the previous one, I had done a lot of research. That research came handy when I wanted to reconnect with the people, and I had a lot of different help in each place. I had from students from schools, just going with the original photographs printed out and in a paper, and going to little towns asking about if somebody knows that person, or well, luckily I will reach out and find with the phone numbers that I had, but it was a very big combination. Even social media played a role in that. And then there were people that we couldn't find. So one of the strategies that I had in mind was, okay, then I will find somebody in that place that will speak about that dream at that time, what it meant and what it means, by the time that I arrive back. And then, that's what I said, Colombia. In terms of difficulties, well, I mean, one extreme maybe is Argentina, where, you know, I lived most of my life, and I have contacts and I know all the codes and everything. And the other extreme was Colombia, a place where we actually had to go with people that provided protections. There was some trips that were canceled due to not being safe or not being able to, you know, guarantee my safety. And then there were situations that we lived through shooting the film that we came very close to to being killed
Oh
or
my God.
else. Yeah.
Wow.
But
Wow.
luckily also there was, you know, the other part, which was finding people that were surprisingly waiting for me to come back, which I had never promised anyone because I had hardly raised the resources to go in the first place. So, but I found people that were convinced that I was coming back, and that was something very, very touching, especially because they cherish even more, even the, you know, the re-encounter, the meeting again, rather than, you know, something that is important to the project, but maybe the fetish of the photograph, the object as itself. No, they were more interested in that connection, which was very much of at the core of the project. A project that is based on trust and is based on bringing back what is important about two people meeting, or more than one or two or three or four people meeting one time and meeting again. No.
That's amazing. Yeah. Before I ask about some of the specific scenarios, I was curious. I mean, was this your first film? And were you trained as a filmmaker, or was this?
Uh, it was my first passion. I found through photography that it was easier to, at that time, to finance and produce something. I actually did work with a great photography director here in Argentina, but I realized after working in one film with him that, you know, it was this long career until, you know, one day I would be able to shoot a project on my own. And I found through photography a way of something more accessible in that sense. You know, I could envision a project and I could accomplish it, although it took me decades, as I described. But it was something that was more feasible. And yes, this at the end ends up being my first film.
Oh wow! Did you bring I mean, the cinematography was exquisite and fabulous. I loved it, and it was amazing. Did you bring a crew with you, or is that you filming with your own camera?
No, one of the things that you learn, and that's the part that that's what in those years you myself, I actually realized that there were all these tools that were actually helpful for me to create a project, no matter what. In terms of, I took drawing classes. I mean, actually, some of the original photographs I envision and draw them before making them, because you have to think of this project that I wanted to change a lot of the dynamics and that at that time were part of how people practice photography. And one of the things was going back to a camera in which you set up a tripod. This is a 4x5 camera, like those that you use a hood on. So in that sense, I wanted to slow down the process, to have time with the people. I wanted to change the time to the dynamic of, you know, working. Something that is crucial, and then I take back when I go and film. And now I will tell you the whole curve on that, which is that brings you back to the idea of looking at people at their eyes. I mean, to connect those gazes, you know, yours and the person who's going to be represented by you. But again, in this collaboration, for me, it was so important what happens in front of the camera as much as how, you know, that image is registered. I mean, there's something about those dynamic that are crucial in the way of the end up product, how it comes to be, you know. That's why I say this project is one of the things at the core is trust. And by having that connection, and by, again, bringing their voice through their writing, and the writing comes from this idea on a blackboard and how we learn in school to name the word outside, and in my case at least was with chalk on a blackboard. So I wanted people to name this which is invisible, which are their dreams, as a way to bring something that is out of the frame. You couldn't see it, it's not on the surface of a person. So that was one of the first things that then is I take back when I go with a film, in terms of how there's so much about what happens in front of the camera, but also how what is there refers to what is outside of the camera, the out of the frame reference that are in many cases being played by the text, by the voice. And again, then when I decided to go and film, I realized that for me it was more important to work with cinematographers that would concentrate on the camera, have this skill being, something that they're so used to, and they would bring also in this collaboration their own vision. And for me, instead, was more important to concentrate on the sound, on the voices, on looking again at the people, and not be hiding behind the camera, and concentrate on the technical part of it. Again, I coming from knowing, photography, there's a lot of things. I'm being a producer. There are decisions that I took knowing of, the time of the day, the light, and things like that. So we will collaborate, and that will be a language that we share. But in terms of what I needed of a crew, I wanted to keep it small. So it was mostly a cinematographer, myself doing sound and production, and a local production person. In a few cases we were 4. So, but it's this small crew also to also cost and keeping the budget down, and being able to go to all these places, that decision was made.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, excuse my ignorance. I don't know how films are made. So just one more question about how the film's made. Did you receive, was it your personal budget, or did you get a grant? How did you finance?
I got many grants, it's like this.
Good.
I always work with like this. I get one and then another one, and it's like weaving, yeah.
That's great. That's great. So let's talk about some of the powerful scenes that, as somebody watching the film, really, make you think, and is sort of impactful. I remember when you visited Cuba, that was immensely, and you show the Malecón, and you show different people. And I was interested in sort of, it seems like in all of the countries that you visit, you try to show 2 sides to the story, and 2 sides of dreams, or different dreams, right? So in Cuba, it's a bit stark, because you show like these young girls that say, what, I want to marry somebody in the United States, right, American, and then you take that to somebody else, and they sort of criticize that dream. And then you show a man, a woman who her ex-husband ends up going to Miami, and they're like, oh, he gained weight, we think his life is okay, and this and that. So I guess what and it seemed like for almost, and I want to talk maybe a little bit about Brazil after this. It seemed like for almost every country you were trying to sort of show 2 sides. So maybe, I don't know, if you want to talk a little bit about how that, why you decided to portray Cuba and the dreams that people were wishing for in that way.
Well, I mean, the countries that I chose, they represent different ideals, hopes, dreams, and also, I mean, they have different outcomes. In the regional stories of each country, but also in the regional story and in the stories of each individual. So what for me is interesting is to see, well, what happened to the changes that were hoped for, and had those being accomplished, not only, in the historical perspective of, decades before I even went and photographed, but, then to work in the time that I had photographed and then come back and filmed and see how, yeah, how, you know, uh, how our lives are affected, by policies that comes from, from governments, and how we are somehow intertwined, not only with the stories of each other. That's one of the things um, that for me is interesting to think. When I started this project, um, the the social media that did not exist, the idea of you being able to tell your stories, and actually, have a phone, photograph, or film yourself, upload them and share them, was not something accessible. It was not there. One of my aims at that time was to create a space, and provide a craft so people will be able to voice their stories. What I see throughout those 30 years, that, okay, that has changed. There's other ways now. But I think what is interesting, that each stories that, that had documented and portrayed, kind of affect the other one. And I that's the thing that I'm interested on seeing how our stories are connected. Um, that I think this idea of policies that affect, somebody in a good way and another one in a bad, will eventually come around and affect yours, one way or the other. I believe that, if somebody is not doing well, obviously, if you're doing good, you think you live in a different reality, but that eventually comes around. Um, and I think that's one of my hopes, is to, by this project, invite really uh, an audience or somebody that's interested to, like, really put themselves in other people's shoes. Something that we say very often, but we rarely do. And I think that's one of the things that I try to work within the film.
I'm just thinking about all of the different, I mean, I love watching every country, but when you're in to get the story that you portrayed sort of in Cuba, right, and the discussion and the
Mm.
debate between the different dreams, did it, I mean, I imagine, did you have to interview a lot of different people and you picked the best shots, or were those the only people that you actually were working with?
No, there's always more people that you can fit in the film. And I mean, and actually, there were scenes that we wanted to make it in the film, and it was like, oh, very painful to actually leave them out. And that's when you realize that you're working with a time-based media, and people can also, take so much attention on, and there's something of how much you can expose without repeating yourself. Also, one of the notions that I had very clear with the original project was that I was working on repetition, and the variance from each story needed to be interesting enough and fulfilling enough in terms of information and context, so, one will add to the other. In this case, was even more. And that's when you, well, need to leave out things that you think they're still good, but you need to think of a film or somehow how all those stories will connect, and how much the audience could take. I mean, there were also, I mean, it's a tough film even for me to watch, um, and there were scenes that we had to, or things that people were narrating that, at one point they were too much. We had to, take them out, because I felt, well, I mean, I want people to be able to watch it. And there's something also about being very careful of not are not falling into this very, delicate line in which I actually try to criticize, which is not to turn other people's suffering into a spectacle. No, I mean, that's one of the things. That's why actually the film starts with this cockfight at the beginning, which is a reference to that. How how you have to be careful on not to become that. No, and how that violence within societies should, we that's what happens sometimes or very often in the media, that it becomes a spectacle, and then we go to another story, and I think you have to be careful about that.
I didn't even, that's excellent. I'm learning a little bit more about the imagery of the cockfight in the beginning of the film and the spectacle. And yeah, that's thank you for sharing that. I In terms of the character, I wanted to ask about the character that has a dream, and I think it's probably the most like not the most impactful, but definitely left an impact. This is like Quiero morir me. Was that a surprise to you when you encountered him, that that would be his dream? And then it was really great how you sort of weaved his story in at the end. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, the young guy that said Quiero morir me.
Yeah, that's Christian. That became the cover of the book. I mean, the project, the original one becomes a book, and that the film is based. And people often ask me why that is on the cover, and actually it's because by opposition. It's because that's a dream that I would never wanted to have found. That shocked me, and his story, when we finished the book, I was told that his dream had come true, that he was killed 6 months later, after me shooting that image, after we doing that portrait together. And it was very tough for me. And when we arrived to film, I was going with this idea of, okay, I want to reconstruct the context of that story through their family. And we go back to the neighborhood, a neighborhood that was tough. They told me, well, it was even tougher when you came the first time. I don't know how you came out in one piece, but we were doing an interview on a corner, and suddenly the teacher who had introduced me in the first place to this student, to this teenager who was not a student at a school, who was a boy who will go just for the meal. He will get a meal, and that's why he will just attend to the school, and then leave. He told me when we arrived to film that we were doing the interview, and he said, well, but it just told me something that I couldn't believe. He's alive. We're like, what? yeah, it seems that he's living on the streets, but his family hasn't seen him in quite some time. So that's when we start with his brother and a friend going at night to look for him in streets that were very tough. Was that search? I told a friend while we were traveling, when we shot some of those scenes, for me was, I said I left my heart in there. I was kind of, wanting to find him. We actually walked those streets with even the equipment hidden, but on us, walked, and it was very tough to see that. And we looked for him for a week. We couldn't find him. People had seen him, but it was very interesting how that story, comes to be at the end, and how he actually transcends the film itself. I stay in contact with his family. I think we had, by going there, we made a change. Sometimes with this idea, you make things, and most people, it's very nihilistic, the times we lived in, and it's more like, nothing that you do is going to change much. But I think we affected that in a positive way. With our presence, with our care, with what we communicated and they communicated with us. It was a strong bond that I think made something good kind of come out of it. Another story in the film is the story of this guy from Salvador trying to cross, and that's another story that I feel that by being there, there was something that changed that night.
This is the end of the film you're talking about,
Yeah.
right? And I couldn't believe that at the end. Did you? I mean, that's not staged. How did you know that they were going to rescue him at that time? Like, how did you find?
We didn't know. We actually, by being there, I realized we were shooting this traveling that I wanted to. I mean, I did that in Cuba with the Malecón, and actually I wanted to show the railing and how that is made, because one of the things that I did in the photographs, and I wanted in this case to actually reinforce, is that images are produced. They're not reality. I don't believe in the idea of the fly on the wall. You're always affecting the reality that you want to document, and I wanted to be very clear about that. And we were shooting that scene on the border, with this tension of this going into that fence, and that started to happen around us. This guy started to do something that in my mind I said, there's something here, something's going to happen. And he crosses his shoes through the bars, and that's when I stopped and I said to the DP, just follow him with the camera. And by the time he goes into the water, so I know the sea a little, and I say, well, we better go and get some help very soon. So I left the DP and I ran to get some help. And I think that's. I mean, I think if he had been alone, that would, yeah. He says it in the film,
So you're the one. I don't think you show that in the film, that you get the help. You're the one.
No, I mean, and that's the part I think. There's two sides. There's the human, the filmmaker, and I mean, I try. One of the things of the whole project is it's not about me, and there's many times that it's very easy to fall into the ego trip, and be. I'm only at the end just hugging Christian, who's gonna supposedly take 6 months to recover, but. Yeah, no, I'm not. I try to stay away, and I mean, I think the focus should be on people's stories and how they come to be.
How about in Brazil? I really liked, you had sort of two sides there in Brazil. And I was wondering what the purpose in your mind was of showing that. So what I saw was, obviously you showed sort of the police presence, the military presence in the favelas, the violence as well. But then you also showed like sort of the upper class remembering some of the violence from the dictadura, right? During 1964, 1985. And so I was wondering, like, was there a purpose, and did you intentionally, or you just thought, well, I'll show just different stories, or what was the message you were trying to convey?
Well, as I said, even in the original project, in which I apply this editing on camera kind of technique, in terms of I was making I mean, that for me were performances, there were actions, there were like this things that then I register with photography, but there was these things that that we were making with the people, interrupting daily life. And one of the things that I had that I wasn't being able to develop the film while I was shooting 4x5 negatives that it would take very long, and a process to make. So I will make notes. And since at that time, in early 90s, I was very careful and I'm very worried about, including all aspects of, each country's society. So I was worried, I was focused on looking if there were children, if there were women, if there were men, with teenagers, grown up, all, I was trying to kind of pan throughout it. And another thing that I was concerned was, as much as included people that had no power to access media and tell their stories, I also wanted to find people that did, but to connect those stories. I just, in the case of Brazil, I think is your question is very good. It's like I have the favela story and told by them, and I had then people that had been politically active during dictatorship, with empathy towards people that lived in situations like favelas, but that had suffered, a different kind of violence. Not that the one that are suffering now in the favelas, although one of the things that is interesting is this woman, this upper class woman that tells her whole story on how her father denied torture, and that how she suffered that, and connects the story of how that, torture in different way is still happening at the favela now.
I think that's very powerful, especially, I mean, I would love to show that. I mean, I'd love to show the entire film to my classes, but I think that's very powerful. I mean, for students, for people to see that, the denial of torture in different ways, and what you're seeing, the pervasive police brutality, obviously not just in Brazil, but all over. How about working in Peru?
Yeah, and I shot this film before, the actual president is it's in charge. So I mean, yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's amazing. I mean, yeah. How was it working with different populations, like in Peru, if you want to talk a little bit about, or even in Guatemala, which was nice. Both of those stories were very powerful as well.
Yeah. Oof. Guatemala, for example, doing the original project, it was very difficult. I mean, if you think of Guatemala is a country with, I don't want to be mistaken, but population around 17 million. Argentina, we had a more than like double that, and we had like 30,000 people disappear. And in Guatemala, that were so much less, they had around 200,000 people killed during the conflict. So when you arrive there, there's this cultural shock, but also the consequences of as I said before, not exercising their freedom of speech. So it was even in the first stage of making this these actions that we did with asking people to voice their dreams. For them, they were very guarded at the beginning. They actually were not used to that somebody will come up and ask them something like that. In general, we are not used to. So that's one of the things that I often say, that this project for me was an immense surprise in that sense, that 99% of the people said yes to me, even knocking on doors and asking, would you write down a wish or a dream, or can I take your photograph after that? And in Guatemala was at the beginning very difficult to like bridge that. So actually I had a local teacher in the first town that I went to photograph help me kind of phrase it and find the way. When we went back, that had a lot changed, and people were so much empowered, and seeing that what had happened with the original project, they were so welcoming in that. but in terms of stories, that's where there's one of the most inspiring stories of all for me. This woman, 60 years old, like chopping wood and and sustaining this daycare center on her own with the help of her daughters. I'm telling this whole story about how he was doing this to provide the parents of these kids with time for them to be able to find a job, to earn money, to be able to provide for their children. Stories that are tainted also with people leaving Guatemala to go to Mexico and then cross to the US. So yeah, Guatemala in that sense crosses a lot of things, as well as Peru, as well as Mexico. Then when I arrived with the Zapatistas, and by the second time, I found this farewell speech by the Subcomandante the figure of the Subcomandante Marcos, which for me is again another of the most, when you see a light at the end of the tunnel, that you see, okay, there's a different way of doing things. We're not going to engage on how other people want us to behave. We're going to find our own path. And I think that's a very inspiring message.
I love that part about Chiapas, and I couldn't believe the murals were fantastic and great. I had no idea. It's just beautiful, and I'm familiar with the philosophy, and it was great how you captured that. And then the Subcomandante Marcos letter, that was wonderful. So do you think you finished filming in 2013? Do you keep in touch with any?
No, I finished photographing 2013. I started filming in 2010, and I finished filming 2017.
Oh, 7. Okay.
So it's like from 10. There's an overlapping of 3 years of like doing the last of the images of that we made on the original project, and then the filming. The filming starts 2010 throughout 2017, and then there's like 3 years of post-production and editing, and that was a very tough time.
Oh, so it's pretty recent then. Even some of the interviews that you did with the people finished in 2017. Yeah. Okay, so that is pretty recent. Do you think, first of all, do you keep in touch with any of the families or the people?
Yes. I stay in touch. Now the film started to be in festival, even within COVID situation. I asked, for people that had participated to be able to watch it, during the festival in their countries. And yeah, I don't stay in touch with all, but with some people that we kind of created a more close bond, and they reach out to me, and I'm happy to be.
Wow. And I guess then, do you think any of this since 2017, obviously some things have changed. We've been in this global pandemic, which unfortunately is still affecting Latin America quite gravely, right? Seriously. Do you think you would find different dreams today in Latin America? And do you think the dreams that you did find in Latin America, did you find that they were maybe unique to the region, or do you think they were also sort of universal dreams that you might find similarly, whether you travel to even, United States or maybe India or Vietnam, different parts of the world?
There's a base that is universal. There's also, that's one of the things that I'm interested in that dynamic of that Brecht presented was, I want people to be able to identify, to, again, have an entry, but there's many that are very specific to the story, to, what Latin America lives through. One of the things I was, when we finished the film just before the pandemic, just remember, there was this caravan heading towards the border. There was uprising in Chile, Bolivia. So there was all the cycles. But one of the things that the film and the whole project wants to delve in is why are there cycles of violence? And there's one of the things that I wanted to be able to portray is and bring them out of this notion that they seem to be capricious, that they happen to, and there's a history behind, and that's what we need to understand. There's a context. There's conflicts that have been between countries and that we share, that we're part of, and there's interest that broken promises within each countries, and policies that had falling back on what their original aim was, and actually turn out to be affecting in the very opposite way our lives.
Oh, that's true. That's true. If
I want to be clear about this. One of the things that I think for me is important is to, I say, not to like pass a broom under the carpet, and I think you have to show what the conflicts are, as tough as as they are, and I don't think of denial and looking the other way. I think you have to be in that way very honest. It's not that I went and looked for problems. I mean, those were the stories that I encountered in the first place, and truly I was actually devastated when I went back and found many of the stories how they had turned out to be. But at the same time, one of the things that I rescue is people resilience. I mean, that's for me is a positive way of having change happen. You have to find that people are still strong and find different ways to sustain their dreams and keep going. The thing we need to do, as human beings, is find what we have in common and try to focus on where we want to be.
That's excellent. That I agree totally. I have two more questions. One question is, what are you working on now? Are you working on another film?
I'm working on very different projects. Yeah, there's a project that I just finished almost simultaneously that has to do with, it's called A History of Violence, and I did volume 1, and now I'm working on like volume 2. And again, finding these things about, I work with 3 like key figures in Argentina, which is Perón, Evita, and El Che, people that have actually transcended at borders in terms of visibility and notoriety. But yeah, when I trace back these stories and I see what happened even with the bodies of these 3, 2 had their hands cut after being dead. Another one of the bodies was abused. So I started kind of trying to trace this violence into our societies, and more than answering question, my impulse is to arise questions. Why is this happening? And I started to make these different pieces based on that in a very different way that I had worked with this film or the project before it, and try to work and find how and question ourselves, this idea of how we load our language every day with violence. And if we do that, we shouldn't be surprised when we find bodies, all over the place, metaphorically and actually physically. So that's a project that I'm still developing. On the other hand, yes, I'm working on two new screenplays based on real stories that I lived through, but having now the freedom of rearranging them throughout fiction, and also doing some interviews also to make a mini series based on stories that relate to real life, but also I just want to have a little play with that too.
Oh, that's amazing. Maybe you'll be on Netflix soon with their miniseries.
Well, I'm working on I mean, the COVID was okay. What I could do, I have all this idea, and I have worked already on some of them, and I was like, okay, let's put ourselves to write, and I've been writing a lot. Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. I would love just. Do you have time for just two more questions? What would be your
Yeah.
advice to budding filmmakers or screenwriters out there, like youth that people that want to really try to, maybe you're scared, but will try to want to make a film,
Well,
or
to
maybe
work with,
students?
I mean, yeah. Basically, I think what is most important is to work. I mean, something that maybe a cliche, but work with what you know and learn more about it. I mean, for me, was this impulse every time that I do a project is things that I collect, stories or that movie that has something that at the end I maybe not at the beginning, but at the end I kind of understand how am I connected to those stories, even though they're very different one from the other. But I realized that that then doing research after beginning something and reading, it's very important. I think I recommend most of my projects, although I come from and I work with visual arts. Most of them comes from writers that that inspired me. There's ideas behind every great project. I think you start with ideas, and that's the beginning. Then you have to do a lot of work. I mean, there's people, I mean, there's many artists that I admire, but most of them, if you look into their work, I mean, even Andy Warhol, that many people think of, oh, he went and did, this and that, or had other people do it. And there's a beautiful song by Lou Reed and what's his partner? It's a record called Songs for Drillia, and one is like, the song is about how he came every day and said, you have to work, this is about work, and if you wrote 10 songs you should have written 15. And there's something about the labor and the craft that you gain with that I think is very important. Nothing is done overnight.
That's amazing. And finally, if somebody were going to ask you to write your dream on a blackboard, what would you write?
Uh, that's a question I'm often asked, and that's the ego part that I try not to fall in and say, no, it's not so much about what my dream is. I mean, making all the things that I have accomplished, obviously, is part of the dreams that I had. But I think it's more, again, we tend in the societies we live on thinking always about the end result, and I think more and more with the years I learn how much is about the process, as well as I gave you the answer to your previous question in that way. I will give it to this. I mean, when I proposed this question to people, was a way of bridging these two realities, mine and somebody that I mostly didn't know, and create this connection. But also because I was interested on how photography at that time, for me, and the people had written about photography, always said, photography is about the past. And I said, well, how can an action can bring past, present, and future? And that's when I came about to ask somebody about their dream, because that's an invitation for someone to think about their past, share it in the present, and project us into a possible futures. And I think that's why the question it's important. And I don't know if it's so. I mean, one of the things that I ask people to be is very specific about on their answer. It should be something that they really want And so, but it was more about creating a dynamic of re-exercising this possibility of dreaming, of thinking of yourself change by a dream granted, but not necessarily achieving the dream. When people ask me about the film, most people or many people evaluate on have they accomplished it or have they not. And for me, it's not about that. It's about the journey that they have done and they could still do after the film was finished.
Well, thank you so much. This is amazing. I recommend anybody, I mean, everybody should see Mapa de Sueños Latinoamericanos, and it's a wonderful, powerful film. And I want to watch it again. I wanted to show it to my students, and I hope that, are you in California right now or in
No,
Argentina?
I'm in Buenos Aires.
Oh, in Buenos Aires. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, I'm hoping that you can come to Philadelphia in person, and you can
I would
also
love
visit
to.
us at the University of Pennsylvania. I think that the students would greatly benefit from a showing of your film and then having a discussion afterwards. I'd love to do that.
Let's do it.
Yeah, that would be great. And I recommend that definitely. But this is great. I'm going to recommend it to others, and thank you.